let's learn a bit more about the actual way that our readers and writers are processing the data that we send and retrieve by talking about delimiters and tokens. These are terms that apply to strings and the way that we process them in this context. Now, in the next unit, we're going to learn how to process strings in a lot more detail, but here's kind of one of the ways that we need to think about string type information. And to help us understand this a bit more, I'm going to create some text here. I'm just going to say, "Hi friend, I want to go to the store." Just a simple phrase. And let's head back to elementary school, and I want you to answer me the question, how many sentences are there in this phrase? How'd you do? You should have gotten 2 if your answer. If you did so, very well done. The first sentence is "Hi friend," and the second is "I want to go to the store." The question here is really, how do we know what is a sentence and where they are broken up? Well, we got some punctuation. This period here and this period here determine the end of these sentences. Now, are these the only things we could use to separate content out into different sentences? No. I could put a question mark at the end of each of these, and now these would both be questions. However, they are still separate sentences. I could also put an exclamation point for emphasis. These are still separate sentences, being split up by punctuation. The delimiter is the punctuation. This is the character, or potentially set of characters. Maybe I want to go an exclaimed question that separate our strings into individual sections. And in English, we call them sentences. In computer science, we call them tokens. And a token is the individual string that's separated by the delimiters. So if my delimiter was exclamation question, I would have 2 separate tokens being listed. "Hi friends" is the first. "I want to go to the store" is the second, not including the punctuation. That's kind of one of the key things here. So how do we work with these? Well, let's dive into our writer and start things off by writing a new custom method in here. To do so, I'm going to copy and paste my initial method because I'm going to borrow some content. I want to keep the name the same because I'm still just writing to a file, but I'm going to have a customized way of doing so. I need the file name, and I need data, except that this time I don't just want a single string. I want an array list of strings for my data because I'm going to be writing multiple things to the file in a row. I also want to have a delimiter. This is the special character or characters that are going to separate one piece of data from another in my file. I'm going to keep this whole try catch block here to save some typing. I still need my file writer wrapped in a print writer. I still need to close it. I still need to print out my exception. The only thing that's different is the core content in here. So I'll add some space for this, but here's a strategy you could be using all the time in this section, which is to simply copy and paste content from one section to another because you will be reusing a lot of the same core logic. And so what do I want to do with this information in here? Well, first of all, I want to be able to actually write all the information in this array list. So I'm going to create a loop. I'm going to use the advanced loop format, which is going to allow me to take each individual string out of this array list and interact with it one at a time. I'm going to call this string, well, what do we call as our terms here? I'm going to call this string a token because technically I'm writing individual tokens. So let's give it a good name like that that makes sense. And I'm writing from all of my data. So this basically just says, look through all of my data and one at a time pull out the individual strings that I'm calling token each time I access one. And now I can do something with each of these tokens when I'm using my writer. Because what I want to have happen here is, well, I want to be able to print out information. So I'm going to print out, now I don't want to do print line here because print line is going to always add a line separator after it. In this one, I just want to have a basic print, which is going to stick everything side by side. And what do I want to have printed? I want to have my token, that's true, but at the end of the token, I want to also attach the delimiter and concatenate it to the end. It's almost like the sentence and the period, or the sentence and the exclamation point. The delimiter is whatever punctuation I want to use to separate one thing from another. And now, well, I'm printing all the contents out into my file, separated by that delimiter. If I go back to my runner, I need an array list to work with. So let's create one here of strings. I'm going to call it data. Make a new array list. Oops, typing a bit messily here. And then my data, I'm going to add. Let's have my list pop up here. Let's go hello and another one. Welcome. Data add to. Won't be much longer here. Data add my. Data add file. And in here, I'm actually going to put an exclamation at the end here. Although we have to be careful because this means that we can't use exclamation point as a delimiter anymore. Otherwise, it will get confused with the file contents. So we need to be a bit clever about the delimiter. So now that I have this data array list string, I have this writer that I've built. This, sorry, we called it write in this file. And I want to write to file with this extra information. And so my file name, let's make a new one. Let's call this delimiter file.txt. And I have my data. And now I can decide what delimiter I want to split up information. I'm going to start with just putting in a space so we can see kind of what this would look like in a really organized, kind of nice way. And now let's run my project here. And as it's running, I'll find my folder here. And I have my delimiter file. Let's pop it open. Hello, welcome to my file. All pops out here. Notice I have a space at the end because it puts a space after each one of my individual tokens. And now all my tokens are put side by side here. And separated by a space. Sorry, that's something in my throat. What if instead, now I'm going to go back to my writer and I'm going to have this not be a true here so that I know that I'm overriding the file's contents. I'm not just appending to it because I want to replace the information. What if I made my delimiter something like a question mark? What would that look like if I ran this? So let's have this run. And then we can go back into my file and reload it. Hello, welcome to my file. And notice how each piece of information is now separated by a question mark. All right, how about like a return, how about an indent, this tab? This is an escape character. I need the backslash here to tell it's not actually meant to be these characters. It's meant to be an actual tab indent. And now if I put that as my kind of delimiter as I'm writing, now I have everything spaced out by an indent in my file, which has a unique kind of set of properties to it. But I'm going to go back to just the space. Actually, you know what? Let's go with the question mark. It'll be a bit more interesting to look at. And we'll run the file again and allow this to complete and reload it. So we got these question marks. All right. Now, what does this have to do with how we read this file? So let's go in and I'm going to create a new piece of functionality for reading from a file here. So I need the file name. But I also need to know the delimiter that I'm going to be reading the file with. And so in here, I have my scanner and I'm reading from the file. Now, what is it that I want to keep and remove from here? Well, technically, I always want to read while it has next inside of it. So I'm really just going to be replacing the stuff inside of this while loop. Everything else is going to be copied and pasted. So I now have like a different option for reading from the file that I'm building that accepts a delimiter so that I can pull that information out using the delimiter information. However, with a reader, it's a bit different. I don't manually add the delimiter in like I did in the writer. You see how I manually concatenated it to the end of the token. In the reader, I actually have to define within my actual scanner file reader what the delimiter is. And so I'm going to go use delimiter of a string of a certain pattern. And this pattern is going to be the delimiter string that I sent it. It's going to automatically now recognize that any of this pattern will be considered to separate my content into its individual tokens. So right now that's a question mark. So we'll see, while it has next, this is going to be looking for if there's any content left in my file. Let's tighten this up a little bit here actually. I want to be able to print out whatever it is I find in my file next. Let's take a look at what this prints out on my screen. Oh, you know what I just realized? I actually haven't run this yet. Let's go to my runner. Now I've already written to this file. It's saved, so I'm going to comment this out and let's go to read. And we're going to read from my file name. Which file? It's the same one, the delimiter text here. And I want to put in the same delimiter I did when I wrote to the file. Now if I run this, I should see printing out to my screen here an issue where we have some kind of a bug. Let me just quickly double check this 1 sec. So let's see. Oh, you know what? Actually, this is working as expected. I was thinking a bit ahead of myself earlier, which is that when I'm using certain types of symbols as delimiters, it can cause a big problem. There's a whole system in coding, something called Regex, that you might want to look up. I'm not going to teach it to you in this course. Regular expressions. It's a way of processing strings in much more kind of fine-combed detail, but it's a bit of a topic that you'll study when you need to in university or in your own studies for now. So there's certain symbols that kind of get in the way, and it kind of interprets them as a regular expression rather than a symbol here. So we're going to need to go with a different type of symbol for our delimiter to read from, which means we actually have to rewrite our file here using a different symbol. Now, we'll see if this one crashes for us. Otherwise, nope, this one doesn't. So things like question marks and multiplication symbols and periods will actually cause some issues. So you have to be careful what you use for your actual delimiter symbol. But in here, we can see that I actually read, hello, welcome to my file, back in properly, even though my file actually has these slashes inside of them. So the file actually has these slashes, but when I read it, they're all printed on a different line without any of those slashes. They've disappeared. Why have they disappeared? Because it's the delimiter, and the delimiter is never taken in as data. It's meant to separate the data into different sections. Let's see one more example of this. Oops. Just to make sure it's really clear. What if I did space, space, dash, space, space as my delimiter in both spots here? Let's run this and see what appears in my file here. Pops out just in the kind of the natural information format that I want, but inside of this, welcome to my file is separated. It looks kind of very odd. So this is a way of being able to determine how you want to separate data out in your file, and then how, of course, you want to be able to interpret that unique format. It's a way of organizing it in a bit of a customized way that you may find some use of in your project to come. For now, experiment with using this type of an idea of a delimiter and try a few different types, read and write your own data and split it up, maybe even add some more complex data than just this. Give it a try. In the next video, we're going to build a bit of a file utility, and I'll take you through the code that I'm sharing with you to use for your project.